Hello and welcome to another opening explorations video, and today I will discuss the semi-Slav defense. Alright, so this position on the board is the semi-Slav defense. Now I'll go back to the beginning and show you how you would go about achieving this opening. So the semi-Slav defense is basically something that can be played against the Queen's Gambit. So d4, d5, c4 is the Queen's Gambit opening. So now, apparently c6 is the most played move, e6 is second, which e6 would be the normal Queen's Gambit. c6 is the Slav defense, which is related to the semi-Slav. The difference is that in the Slav defense, you have the opportunity to bring this bishop outside the pawn chain, and with the semi-Slav, a lot of times you'll play, just e6 blocking that bishop in, and then the bishop might have to go here to b7, or even a6 maybe. But let's take a look at how this continues. So the most played move is knight to f3. And then knight to f6 by black, knight to c3, and then e6. The number one move. Second is d takes c4, but for the semi-Slav, we have this e6 move, and now we're in the semi-Slav defense variation, which fights we started with a Queen's Gambit and went into the Slav and now the semi-Slav. So we have a triangle pawn formation which really reinforces this d5 square, which is being attacked by the knight and the pawn. But it's super solid because we have two pawns and the queen and knight backing it up. The one downside is this light squared bishop is bad and blocked in for the moment. This also allows the dark squared bishop to develop. So now, played most often by white is e3 here. So we'll take a quick look at that first before we go back and look at the second most common move. All right, so e3, what does that do? Well, it allows this bishop to protect the pawn here. So the number one move by far, 31,000 versus almost 2,000. A6 is played. And I saw a headline or some type of information on YouTube, I think it was, where maybe Magnus Carlsen was saying that you can't really play the main lines as much anymore because everybody prepares for them. So that may be why Magnus Carlsen has been playing a lot of unusual openings to try and catch his opponents off guard. All right, so most often played is knight at b to d7. So remember that. You may want to play some of the second, third, or fourth most played moves. And if you do that a few times, just double check the opening variations and make sure it's something that's safe to play. But if you do that a few times, play less common moves, your opponent will quickly be in unfamiliar territory and have trouble figuring out what to do, more so than if he plays a bunch of memorized moves. All right. Now for white, queen to c2 is played most often. Excuse me. And a lot of times this knight will, this queen will end up here on c2, lining up on the king side, especially if black decides to castle there, which he probably will. So let's continue. Bishop to d6 is played, aiming down through the center and at white's king side. Now, bishop to d3 is played most often, followed by b3. That way, if there's an exchange here, the b pawn can recapture instead of maybe the bishop, and then that bishop could be maybe chased probably by the knight, possibly, because if this pawn pushes forward, this could be a backwards pawn weakness here. All right, so the most common move, bishop to d3. We have a battery aiming at the king side, but it looks like black is not afraid of that and just castles here. So now, if the knight jumps up here to add the pressure, the pawn could just push forward and chase that knight back. All right, now number one move is for white to castle. And finally, we have this exchange here. The bishop recaptures, and it looks like b5 is the most played move. a6 is also played here, the number two move, and then e5. So, we'll stick with the most common move and see what happens here. Bishop retreats all the way to e2, and now we have bishop to b7. So the bishop probably retreated here to keep an eye on this knight, figuring that once this bishop lines up here on the knight, there's a chance of an exchange and breaking the pawns on the king side. So rook to d1, the most played move, followed by queen to c7. We have a battery, and now e4. Now, one thing about this semi-Slav, apparently there's a lot of theory, and the games can sometimes get tactical and tricky. And this is what I was playing with black in my Quest for 2000 series. But maybe I might think about changing to something that can be less crazy, maybe a regular Queen's Gambit opening or something. So I'll still have to figure that out. But for the meantime, or in the meantime, I'm just playing this semi-Slav opening, and I'm still trying to figure things out. So it's good to look at this database and see what some of the recommendations are. So e5 here, and then ignoring this, bishop to g5. All right, so bishop to g5, e takes d4, rook takes. We don't want to take with the knight, or there's a possible capture here with a check. So knight to e5, interesting here, threatening an attack there. Bishop takes, breaking apart these pawns, but now the rook may be able to line up on the king here. So g3 is played to block this attack and future rook attacks. So bishop to c5, attacking the rook, rook to d2, and queen to b6, creating a battery here. So now rook to f1, knight to g4, adding more pressure. Knight drops back to d1. So yeah, a lot going on here. The game ended in a draw. So let me go back. Well, we'll go to the beginning here and get back to this Slav defense, semi-Slav, excuse me. So once again, the game will start with d4, d5, and then c4, the Queen's Gambit. And so the most common move here is e6. And now it looks like I have an error, so I'm not sure what is going on there. But back to the game. We had, this pawn moving up here. This is the Slav defense. And, Slav defense. Now we have the knight to f3, knight to f6. So we develop the knights. Well, white does. Black here plays e6. So this is the semi-Slav. Let me try and get rid of this error and go back to the beginning here. So d4, d5, c4, c6, the Slav defense. Knights are developed by white. So notice there's a fight for this d5 pawn, and then e6 is played here. the semi-Slav. So we looked at knight to f6. Let's see here. If I go back. So after e6, now, yeah, I don't know, there was something fishy going on in the database. So e6, the semi-Slav, here e3 is played most often. The second most played move is this, so we might as well take a look at that. But you can just put the question to the bishop after capture, queen captures, now e3, and white has gotten rid of the bad bishop. So here, knight to d7, just developing the knight, bishop to d3, and because this bishop is already moved, now we have a capture and a recapture, forcing that bishop to just move again. So here, g6, preparing to fianchetto possibly and castle kingside. So white castles kingside, the bishop is fianchettoed, and now e4, grabbing the center here. e5, fighting for the center, and now most played is this move. d5, knight to b6, adding pressure to this, attacking the bishop, so the bishop retreats, and now what do we have next here? Bishop to g4, a pin. All right, so that is ignored. And then rook to c1 was played. So here, after capturing, it looks like black won both of those games. So we could take a look at that. In the game, most often played is castling. But, I mean, you could go ahead and do this. And then, after queen captures, I mean, you'd probably want to keep the queens on the board because otherwise, well, I don't know. We'll just take a look at it. King up to e7, the rooks are activated, or connected, I should say. Knight to a4, rook at a to c8, and knight up to c5. All right, well, let's get back to the semi-Slav position. All right, instead of bishop to g5, let's take a look at what happens if they capture here. Oh, excuse me. If white captures, well then normally they would capture with the e pawn. So now you have an open e file or half open e file, and they have the half open c file. So black will try and play down the e file, white will play up the half open c file. So now once again we have this bishop to g5 move. This move breaks the pin, queen to c2. So some of the same common moves. Now, g6 is played most often here, or they could just castle. I guess you would play this to prevent an attack with the knight, maybe. I don't know. Let's take a look at it. e3. Bishop, okay, so this may be why. Now you can attack the queen, bishop to d3 to block. We have an exchange of a bad bishop for a good one. Knight at b to d7, castling, rook at a to b1. Space is gained on the queen side. Now rook to e8. in case this bishop tries to come up here and grab these dark squares. Queen back to c2. Knight to e4. White wins more often if they capture here. All right, but we have capture, capture. Now what? b4, capture, capture, b5, takes, takes. Our knight is under attack, and knight to d2, maybe eyeing this b3 and the jump up here into this outpost at some point. So there you go, another example of the semi-Slav, like how it could play out. So if we go back to it here, the initial semi-Slav position, what else could white do? Looks like another option is g3. Then normally we have that, capture, bishop to g2, b5, trying to hold on to the b pawn. Then knight up to e5, putting pressure on this. Looks like knight to d5, castle, bishop to b7, a4, a6, e4 attacking, and then an exchange here. So what next? Attack on the knight, f4, gaining space on the king side, bishop to e7, and now what? Knight to g4. Castle, e5, lining up on the pawn. Knight to b6, threatening this. So that is ignored, well, at least it was in this game, in favor of this move. So capture, and then knight to e3 was played. g6 protects that. Knight takes f5 anyway. Capture, rook capture. So we've opened, well, half open g file here. f6, attack on the rook, and king to h8 now. So that's what was played. And then after capture, bishop captures, capture here, capture, exchanges. And anyway, this gives you an idea of how the game could play out. The rook finally captures here, an attack, and the rook will attack the queen here. So queen over to g5, and white ended up winning here. So are they ahead in material? Let's see. Well, anyway, I don't want to dig or dwell too long on one continuation. Back once again to the initial semi-Slav position, and let's just see if there's anything else we should look at. I'll take another look at the most commonly played move here. So e3, and then we looked at knight at b to d7, but we could take a look at this move. So bishop to b4, pinning the knight. We break that pin. Other knight develops. Bishop to d3. Castle. Castle. So both sides just developing pieces. And then the bishop, no longer doing anything here, drops back, aiming at the king side. So queen and bishop create a battery aiming at black's king side. So h6 to prevent any surprises here. Rook at A to D1, lining up on the queen in the center here. So E5. And now we have an exchange in the center. E4, oh, excuse me, it's white's turn, and white has to prevent this fork. So capture, knight captures, bishop, capture, knight captures, knight to f6, attacking the bishop, and then kind of tricky stuff here. We attack their bishop, so capture, queen captures, rook to e8, queen retreats, oh sorry, capture. So anyway, this is one continuation where there was just everything being exchanged off here. Queen to c7 lining up here, so h3 is played. Rook to e6, preparing to double the rooks, so we fight that by going here. Rook at a to e8, capture, and now what? h4, gaining space. g6 attacks the queen. Queen to d3, preparing to move the bishop and maybe go after this at some point. Although it's protected for fairly well at the moment. h5, g3, queen to d8. And now you could possibly move back and attempt to trade queens. All right, there you have it, another example. And since this is just an introduction, I'll leave it with that. You can leave comments if you would like to see, any more in-depth opening reviews in these opening exploration videos. Just leave whatever comments you would like and let me know what you prefer to see, what you want in the future. So please like and subscribe if you haven't already. Feel free to do that. And thank you for watching. Have a super chess day.